Spider-Man: Homecoming aspires to be more than its precursors. It tells a small-scale story about a young man struggling against himself to become something more. Accepting his Nobel Prize for Literature in 1949, William Faulkner began his speech with humility, not accepting the award on behalf of himself and who he is, but on behalf of his body of work and its purpose.
I feel that this award was not made to me as a man, but to my work, a life's work in the agony and sweat of the human spirit, not for glory and least of all for profit, but to create out of the materials of the human spirit something which did not exist before.
Spider-Man is like other properties in popular culture that endure. He resonates because he complicates his life by following his drive to become more than he is. When Stan Lee originally created the character, he drew from the ordinary, the commonplace anxieties, the flaws, and the struggles of the little guy, so he could create a character that both never existed before, yet somehow always existed. In the 1977 magazine Quest, Stan Lee wrote this about the creation of Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. I was attempting to place these fantastic characters in the real world, giving them human traits and reactions, trying to combine fairy tale concepts with down-to-earth reality. One technique that led to the reality of this character was Lee's use of the internal monologue. Our characters soliloquize enough to make Hamlet seem like a raging extrovert. Never before have comic books exhibited such interminable soul-searching, such agonizing reappraisals on the part of the hero and villain alike, such a dogged quest for truth, understanding, and basic motivation. And it's this film's singular focus on one truth that lends to its success and proves why Spider-Man: Homecoming tries to save the human race. The film doesn't focus on power, responsibility, or relationships. Its central idea is concerned with how someone can rise above themselves to become something better, to improve, progress, grow into their fullest potential. That is Peter Parker's motivation. It's what he hopes to understand. It's the truth for which he is so hungrily searching. We all know Spidey's origin story by now, and I really appreciate how Tom Holland's Spider-Man quickly deals with this part of the spider story. He was bitten by a spider. The end. Simple. And the audience can move on, because the defining thing about Spider-Man isn't the spider bite. It isn't even Uncle Ben's death, which isn't even directly mentioned in the film. But it is his compulsive desire to prove himself as something more than a teenage sophomore in tights. You see, Spider-Man: Homecoming, I believe, is the first great Peter Parker movie. We spend time in high school. We see Peter video blogging about his experiences overseas during the Civil War movie. We see him crushing on Lauren Harrier's Liz. We even see him learn to dance and dress for the school's homecoming dance. Haha, I see what you did there, Marvel. He's returned home from the Civil War. It's also referencing the dance. Oh, and Spidey returning to a Marvel film as an IP. Nice going, Marvel. Anyway, if you remove the superhero stuff, this plays out as the usual high school outcast nerd narrative. The nerdy guy struggles to fit in and get the girl. He goofs around with his nerdy friend Ned. He frustrates other students by answering all the questions in class correctly. But the superhero stuff is what gets this movie really swinging from a web. But back to Faulkner's speech. In it, he addresses the young, aspiring writers who he knows envy his status as Nobel Prize winner. He looks out over the audience and transports them from the stage and the cameras and the awards and the crowd. He situates them in the fears of the day, of bombs, of war, of impending threats, of communism, and he tells them what he sees in the hearts of humanity.
Our tragedy today is a general and universal physical fear, so long sustained by now that we can even bear it. There are no longer problems of the spirit. There is only the question, when will I be blown up?
We suffer a similar terror today. Terrorism has seeped into the back of our minds. We all feel its presence each day, but like a sore back, the ache lessens until our bodies ignore it like white noise. Things like superhero movies or video games or activism distract us from this deep-seated fear. But it is there. And Faulkner claims that the writers of his time have forgotten the problems of the human heart in conflict with itself, and instead dwell on the external conflicts like terrorism or war. We all have seen an epidemic of blockbuster movies ending with a third act centered around some giant glowing hole in the sky, or some massive weapon or ship laying waste to cities. These scenes are the culmination of flat characters chasing after some MacGuffin, some magical object like a tesseract. This is the external conflict. But great writing, great movies that endure, they investigate the destruction of the self by the self. This is why tragedies like Hamlet or Macbeth still resonate today. This is why Robert Downey Jr.'s guilt-stricken Tony Stark is so captivating and relatable on screen. He's self-destructive. And I'll be spending a whole other video essay on Stark and his guilt, and why it sticks with us. But Peter Parker is the same, and that's how Stan Lee wanted it. Returning to his 1977 article in Quest, Lee offers his explanation for Spider-Man's universal appeal. It's a pretty safe bet that you and I have one thing in common with the whole human race. We all possess a certain degree of rottenness, just enough to make us interesting. We may be genuinely fond of our friends, we may respect and admire any number of people, wishing them success, and yet, we never quite want them to succeed too much. Stan Lee goes on to argue that we secretly feel better about ourselves when we're doing just a tad bit better than our friends and family. And he argues this is the magical ingredient embedded in the webhead. For all his power, brains, and fame, the poor kid has far more problems, far more hang-ups than a sterling soul like you. This is why Peter Parker is so often his worst enemy throughout the comics and the movie. Though Spider-Man Homecoming doesn't replay the death of Uncle Ben and Peter's involvement, or lack thereof, historically Peter Parker is driven by the guilt of not using his powers responsibly. As an overindulgent teenager, he uses his powers to advance his wealth and social status, which leads to loss and grief and guilt. It's from this pit of guilt that he rises and swings above the city. And rising is what I believe this particular character is all about. Throughout Spider-Man Homecoming, Peter is itching for more of what he experienced in Civil War. He wants to be an Avenger. He wants to use his powers to make a larger impact on the world. He's not a bad, self-obsessed jerk like Tony Stark started out as. Peter is genuinely a good kid who wants to take on the mantle of superhero. But Tony holds him back. Again, Tony's conscience couldn't withstand the guilt if anything happened to Peter. So he limits Peter's Spidey suit, offering some of the film's best comedic moments. So, after Civil War, Peter is stuck living an average life as a sophomore in high school, getting lost in YouTube videos of himself as Spider-Man, stopping a bicycle thief, and giving an old woman directions on the street. He's stuck being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, a name given to him by Stark. And this drive to aspire to greatness, to become more than who you are, this is the American dream, but also, it is the human dream. It's hardwired into us. We all somehow know things can be better, perfected, progressed. If we study harder, work longer, and legislate smarter, history will culminate in utopia. Or more personally, if we read that book, attend that therapy session, or get that promotion, we'll feel better and be free to be better. I believe being an aspiring man is written into the core of our race. Now, that drive to aspire can lead down some pretty dark, twisted paths. But we all want to be more than what we are. We all had lofty goals as children: astronaut, doctor, fireman, gymnast. At least we had these for a while until the reality and cyclical grind of adult life teaches you that that isn't possible if you want to pay the bills, make dinner, and squeeze out a bit of entertainment before you pass out. But that's why we tell stories like Spider-Man: Homecoming. Faulkner ends his speech by arguing that we must learn and relearn the truths of the human heart.
The old universal truth, lacking which any story is ephemeral and doomed: love and honor and pity and pride and compassion and sacrifice. Until he relearns these things, he will write as though he stood among and watched the end of man.
Spider-Man offers a pure, optimistic vision of ourselves, that we can climb the walls that separate us from reaching our pinnacle selves, that we will survive both our daily struggles and the disasters of terror. In one of the most purest Spidey moments in the film, Peter is trapped beneath a building that's just fallen on him. He struggles to break free, but can't. It's a frightening moment because our hero, we realize, is just a little kid crying out in the dark for help. But there is no one there. So he rips off his homemade mask and tosses it aside. He cries and you feel trapped with him, squirming in the claustrophobia. Then he sees something reflected in a puddle before him. Half of his mask dips out from the water as his own face looks back at him. It's that moment where he realizes that Peter Parker is just as heroic as Spider-Man, that he is something more because he endures and pursues greatness, that he is inexhaustible. And of course, he whispers to himself, "Come on, Peter, come on, Spider-Man," and lifts the metaphorical and physical weight off his back. This is that inexhaustible voice being told to us that we can survive, endure. So, does the movie argue that through our own grit and self-belief, humanity can aspire to become great? Can we wrestle with those internal struggles that define our race, which Faulkner so closely holds on to? Will it just take the small voice of a few authors and politicians and preachers to push us out of our confused adolescence as a race? The film certainly thinks so. I mean, listen to the aspirational theme by Michael Giacchino. And Faulkner would think so too. But Paul from the New Testament wouldn't agree. "I do not understand what I do, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing." This inner conflict is the scaffold for all great fiction. And I think this is what Stan Lee was pointing to, the universal rottenness within us. Tony Stark is his own greatest enemy, and the same can be said about Peter, and Thor, and Hulk, of course. But it is also our reality and our burden. Can writers help humanity endure and evolve into something more, as Faulkner might suggest? This is such a universal trait and story. We love the idea of someone enduring hardship, coming from behind to win, succeeding against all odds. Being the little guy is kind of who we are. Remember, the Bible, acting as a core influence on much of Western literature, is the story of the underdog, of humanity, of the Jewish people, of the early Christian church. All of them struggling with their flaws and disbelief in relationship with a perfect God. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So, Spider-Man: Homecoming proves that Tom Holland portrays the best Peter Parker story because it investigates the internal conflict of the man struggling against himself to become more. He makes mistakes. He endangers hundreds of people, interferes with an FBI sting operation, and breaks a girl's heart. It's his obsession with trying to prove himself. It's his insecurities about who he is and what he can do that drives a lot of his failures in the film, but it's also driving his successes. And this is all while he's aspiring for membership in the Avengers, Earth's mightiest heroes. We love Peter Parker and Spider-Man because we are Peter Parker. We are broken, struggling with ourselves to do good, perfecting our skills and characteristics to meet our potential, but still we're tainted by the secret rottenness that Stan Lee attributes to Parker's popularity. So, when Peter succeeds at winning the day and becoming more than a flashy Stark suit, we are empowered. The idea of Captain America resonates as genuine goodness, free of the skepticism and cynicism of our postmodern age, because he promises that goodness is possible and will overcome evil. The same can be said about Superman, but not the current DCEU Superman. Anyway, we need to think that we can look in the mirror and picture ourselves as some perfected future self, and Tom Holland's Peter Parker gives us that. So maybe Faulkner is right and Paul is wrong. That internal struggle of doing good instead of wrong will be overcome. Humanism wins the day! And maybe stories like Spider-Man or Star Trek or Wonder Woman demonstrate our need for writers to prop up humanity with these stories of an optimistic maturation of the human race. But how can the broken pillars that create these stories from the materials of the human spirit really prop up other broken pillars? Thank you so much for listening and watching. I love Spider-Man, and I think this shows why, because he's so universal. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Webhead. Please comment below, please like and share and subscribe. You can tweet me your thoughts about Spider-Man and anything else on Twitter @ShelfNerds. And if you really liked this video and my take on Spider-Man, I think you would really enjoy my take on Toy Story 3 and how Toy Story 3 is life. So you can find that on my channel, Completing the Shelf. Again, subscribe and let me know what you think about Spider-Man Homecoming.